Introduction to Hungary in the early 11th century. In the early 11th century, Hungary stood at a crossroads, a nation fractured by the weight of internal strife and external pressures. The Hungarian kingdom, forged by King Stephen I, the first Christian monarch of the region, was still young. Though Stephen had solidified Christianity as the state religion and established Hungary as a powerful force in Central Europe, his successors struggled to maintain the stability he had so carefully crafted. The death of King Stephen I in 1038 marked the beginning of a tumultuous period for Hungary. Without a strong successor, the kingdom descended into political chaos. The once unified nation splintered, and rival factions of the nobility, including powerful families vying for the throne, began to tear apart the fabric of the kingdom. Hungary was a land of clashing ambitions, with the nobles seeking power and control over the destiny of the kingdom. It was in this landscape of uncertainty that Andrew, a young prince with a claim to the throne, would begin his journey. The birth of Andrew I. Born around 1015, Andrew was the second son of Bela I, a former duke and future king of Hungary, and a member of the Arpad dynasty. His family was one of the most influential in Hungary, and Andrew's early life was marked by the privileges and expectations of royal blood. However, like many heirs to powerful thrones, his life was not destined to be one of certainty and ease. Growing up, Andrew would have been well versed in the complexities of royal politics. The Arpad family, while powerful, was also embroiled in constant power struggles with competing noble houses. From a young age, Andrew's future was uncertain. His older brother, Bela, was initially seen as the more likely heir to the throne. Still, Andrew would soon find himself thrust into the turbulent world of political intrigue, survival, and warfare. Andrew's childhood, marked by uncertainty and the constant threat of betrayal, would shape him into a leader who would be forced to think and act decisively in the face of adversity. The lessons of survival would serve him well, as Hungary's future, his future, remained perilous and fraught with danger. The death of his father and the political turmoil. In 1038, King Stephen I passed away, and his death unleashed a fierce battle for the throne. Hungary's political landscape, already fragile, became a battlefield for competing factions. The young Andrew found himself facing the reality of an unstable kingdom and a royal house torn apart by rival claims. Andrew's father, Bela I, had been a stabilizing force, but his reign was short-lived. After his death, his sons were left to navigate the chaos. Andrew's elder brother, Bela, initially sought to claim the throne, but another claimant, Samuel Abba, rose to challenge his rule. Abba, a member of a rival noble house, seized the opportunity to crown himself as king, leading Hungary into a period of civil war and conflict. Andrew and his family were forced into exile, seeking refuge in neighboring lands as the struggle for the throne reached new heights. As Hungary descended into civil strife, the young prince's education in the harsh realities of power politics intensified. In foreign courts, he witnessed firsthand the intrigue, betrayal, and military conflicts that would define his reign. These early experiences taught Andrew valuable lessons in diplomacy, strategy, and warfare, skills that would prove crucial in the years to come. Though exiled, Andrew's resolve only hardened. His ambition to reclaim the throne and restore order to his homeland grew stronger with each passing year. Little did he know that the struggle for Hungary's future would soon come to a head in a battle that would shape the destiny of both the kingdom and the man himself. The seeds of leadership. During his years in exile, Andrew was not just a passive observer of the world's political stage, he became an active participant. His time in foreign courts, including those of the Holy Roman Empire and the Kingdom of Poland, allowed him to form vital alliances and gain support for his future bid for the throne. It was in these courts that Andrew began to cultivate his reputation as a leader capable of uniting factions and securing loyalties. He was not just a royal by birth, he was a prince who understood the intricacies of both war and diplomacy. His time away from Hungary gave him the perspective and wisdom he needed to return to the kingdom as a strong and capable leader. As Hungary remained embroiled in civil war, Andrew watched from afar as Samuel Abba's rule began to falter. The kingdom, divided between multiple rival factions, needed a unifying force, someone who could end the turmoil and restore order. Andrew knew that he was the one with the claim, the experience, and the support to bring stability back to Hungary. It was during this time that Andrew began to lay the groundwork for his return. He reached out to those who had once supported his father's reign, forging alliances with nobles, military leaders, and religious figures who saw in him the hope of a united Hungary. His growing network of supporters would soon become the backbone of his campaign for the throne. But even with his alliances, Andrew knew that success would not come easily. The road ahead would be filled with battles, betrayals, and challenges, foreshadowing the fight for the throne. The final moments of Andrew's exile were marked by the quiet preparations for a return that would reshape Hungary's future. In the year 1046, the political landscape in Hungary began to shift. Samuel Aba's power began to wane as his enemies closed in, and Andrew saw his opportunity. The time had come for him to take action. Gathering his forces, Andrew crossed into Hungary with a small but determined army, ready to reclaim the throne that he believed was his by birthright. The journey back to his homeland was fraught with danger, as he had no certainty of victory and no guarantee of support once he arrived. Yet, with each step closer to Hungary, his resolve only grew stronger. The story of Andrew I, from this point forward, would be defined by the fierce battles and relentless determination to restore his family's rule. The young prince was about to enter the most challenging phase of his life, one that would determine whether he would be remembered as a king who had conquered his destiny, or a prince who had fallen to the chaos of Hungary's fractured kingdom. The crown awaited him, but so did the bloodshed, betrayals, and sacrifices that would come with it. This was just the beginning of Andrew I's journey. The fight for Hungary was about to begin. The conflict for the Hungarian crown. The year was 1046, and Hungary was still reeling from years of internal conflict. The kingdom, once united under King Stephen I, had splintered into rival factions, each with their own claim to the throne. Samuel Aba, the self-proclaimed king, was struggling to maintain control amidst growing discontent and widespread rebellion. Andrew I, having spent years in exile, was now poised to return and stake his claim to the throne. When Andrew crossed into Hungary with his army, it was not as a conqueror, but as a prince determined to restore order. His forces, though smaller than those of Samuel Aba, were composed of loyal supporters, noblemen, military leaders, and mercenaries who believed in his cause. Andrew knew that his claim to the throne wasn't just a matter of bloodline, it was a battle for the future of Hungary itself. The chaos had to end, and only he, with his leadership and vision, could unite the warring factions. However, Samuel Aba, ever the determined rival, would not give up the throne without a fight. The battle for Hungary was about to unfold on a scale that would decide the future of the kingdom. The Battle of Mogyorod. The tension in Hungary reached its peak in 1046 with the impending clash between Andrew's forces and those of Samuel Aba. The two armies were poised for a decisive battle that would determine the kingdom's fate. Andrew had the support of many of Hungary's powerful noble families, who had grown disillusioned with Samuel's rule. But Aba's forces, though less united, were formidable and fought fiercely to hold on to the throne. The Battle of Mogyorod, fought in the fields near modern-day Budapest, became the pivotal moment in the struggle for Hungary. Andrew's forces, although outnumbered, were better organized and more motivated, driven by the promise of restoring Hungary to its former glory. His leadership on the battlefield, combined with the strategic expertise of his commanders, gave Andrew an edge over his rival. The battle itself was fierce, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. The forces of Samuel Aba fought with desperation, knowing that their survival depended on holding onto the throne. But Andrew's soldiers, inspired by his vision of a unified Hungary, fought with unmatched resolve. The tide of the battle turned when Andrew's cavalry, led by his trusted commanders, managed to break through the enemy lines and flank Samuel's forces. In the end, Samuel Aba's army was defeated, and he was forced to flee the battlefield. The victory at Mogyorod marked a turning point in the struggle for Hungary. It was not only a military triumph for Andrew, but a signal to the entire kingdom that his claim to the throne was no longer to be disputed. Samuel Aba's reign was over, and Hungary had a new king. But while the battle was won, the war for the hearts and minds of the Hungarian people was far from over. The aftermath and consolidation of power. With Samuel Abba defeated, Andrew I entered the capital city of Esztergom to claim the throne. The kingdom, however, was far from stable. The nobles who had supported Andrew I in the battle now sought rewards for their loyalty. And the church, which had played a crucial role in Andrew's rise to power, expected its own share of influence. Andrew knew that his position was still precarious. Despite his victory, Hungary was a land divided. The noble families, while loyal to him for the moment, had their own ambitions and desires. If Andrew was to secure his rule, he would have to navigate the complex web of alliances, rivalries, and feuds that had plagued Hungary for years. In the months following his victory, Andrew worked tirelessly to consolidate his power. He forged alliances with the most influential noble families, offering them land and titles in exchange for their loyalty. He strengthened his ties with the Catholic Church, reaffirming his commitment to Christianity as the unifying force in Hungary. Andrew understood that his reign could not survive without the support of both the nobles and the church, and so he made strategic concessions to both. But not all was smooth sailing. The remnants of Samuel Abba's supporters, though defeated, were still a threat. Andrew's forces had to keep a close watch on these factions, who had retreated into the far reaches of the kingdom. Small skirmishes continued as the final vestiges of Abba's supporters mounted their resistance. Andrew's leadership was tested once again as he dealt with these uprisings, proving that the price of power was constant vigilance. The role of the Church. One of Andrew's most important alliances was with the Catholic Church, which had become a powerful institution in Hungary under King Stephen I. The Church had been instrumental in legitimizing Stephen's reign and spreading Christianity throughout the kingdom. As Andrew I sought to strengthen his rule, he turned to the Church once again for support. In exchange for its backing, Andrew reaffirmed the Church's role in Hungarian society. He made significant donations to monasteries and churches, ensuring that the clergy were well compensated for their loyalty. Additionally, he granted them lands and privileges, securing their support in his battle to retain the throne. But Andrew's relationship with the Church was not without complications. The clergy, while loyal to him, also had their own agendas. Some members of the Church sought greater influence over royal affairs, and Andrew had to carefully balance their demands with the need to maintain royal authority. The king understood that the Church was a powerful force, but he also knew that he could not allow it to become too powerful. This delicate dance between church and state would continue throughout his reign. Andrew's first actions as king. With the battle won and his power consolidated, Andrew I set to work on shaping the future of Hungary. His first actions as king focused on restoring order to a kingdom that had been fractured by years of civil war. One of Andrew's most significant reforms was the strengthening of royal authority. He recognized that the nobility's influence was a double-edged sword. While they had supported him in his rise to power, they could just as easily turn against him if they felt their interests were threatened. To prevent this, Andrew sought to centralize power in the monarchy. He established a system of royal offices and institutions that gave him greater control over the kingdom's affairs, diminishing the influence of the nobles. Andrew also worked to rebuild Hungary's military forces, recognizing the need for a strong army to defend the kingdom from external threats. He reformed the army's structure, ensuring that it was better equipped and more disciplined. His military reforms would prove crucial in the years to come, as Hungary faced threats from neighboring powers such as the Holy Roman Empire and Poland. But Andrew's reforms were not limited to the military and political spheres. He also sought to strengthen Hungary's cultural and religious identity. By supporting the Church and promoting Christian values, he hoped to unite the diverse people of Hungary under a common faith. His reign marked a period of cultural renewal, as Hungary's monasteries and churches became centers of learning and religious devotion. As Andrew I worked to secure his power and strengthen the kingdom, his reign began to take shape. But challenges remained. The Kingdom of Hungary, while united under his leadership, would face new tests in the coming years. The road ahead would be fraught with dangers, both from within and from without. Yet, with each passing day, Andrew's position as king became more secure. The Battle of Mogorod was behind him, but the battle for Hungary's future was just beginning. The kingdom, under Andrew's leadership, was on the cusp of a new era, one that would forever change the course of Hungarian history. Andrew's vision for Hungary. With his victory secured and the throne firmly in his grasp, Andrew I's reign began in earnest. Yet, the newly crowned king was keenly aware that his role was not simply to rule, but to rebuild. Hungary, after years of division and civil war, needed more than just a monarch, it needed a vision. Andrew was not just a man of arms, but also a ruler who sought to shape the future of his kingdom. His vision was clear: to create a stable, unified Hungary that would thrive both culturally and politically under the banner of Christianity. At the core of Andrew's vision was the belief that Hungary's strength lay in its unity. This unity was not just political but also religious. Andrew understood that the Christian faith, a legacy of his father and his predecessor King Stephen I, was the very foundation upon which Hungary could rebuild itself. He envisioned a kingdom that was not just strong militarily, but also spiritually, where the Catholic Church would play a central role in the governance and moral compass of the nation. But unity, Andrew quickly realized, was an elusive goal. Hungary's nobility, once unified under King Stephen, were now a fragmented group, each with their own interests, ambitions, and grudges. Andrew would have to tread carefully, balancing the delicate relationships with the powerful noble families, ensuring their loyalty while also asserting his royal authority. It was a task easier said than done. Andrew also realized that while his kingdom was rich in resources and potential, it was vulnerable. The borders of Hungary were surrounded by powerful neighbors: the Holy Roman Empire to the west, Poland to the north, and the Byzantine Empire to the east. As much as Andrew sought to foster peace, he knew that Hungary could not afford to ignore its military needs. A strong defense was essential, and Andrew set about reorganizing and fortifying Hungary's military forces. Dealing with the nobility, Andrew's rule, though secure on the surface, was constantly under pressure from the powerful noble families. These nobles, many of whom had supported him in his battle for the throne, were now looking for rewards and assurances of their position. While Andrew had promised stability, he knew that the loyalty of the nobility was fragile. If he were to hold on to power, he needed their continued support. One of Andrew's most difficult tasks was managing the complex web of noble relationships. Hungary's noble families were powerful and often in conflict with one another, each seeking greater control over land, resources, and influence. The kingdom's aristocracy was divided between those who had supported Andrew's rise and those who were disillusioned with the new king's consolidation of power. Andrew had to carefully navigate this terrain, making political concessions to the nobles, while also ensuring that his royal authority was never in question. Andrew's method of dealing with the nobility was pragmatic. He offered lands and privileges to those who supported him, while using strategic marriages to solidify alliances. He also established a system of royal offices and courts that ensured the monarchy would have a direct say in the governance of the kingdom. By placing his loyal supporters in key positions, Andrew sought to limit the power of the independent nobles, bringing them into the fold while curbing their ability to challenge his authority. Yet, despite his careful diplomacy, Andrew's reign was not without its challenges from within the noble ranks. There were factions that continued to resist his rule, seeing his consolidation of power as a threat to their own. As time passed, these internal tensions would rise again, leading to further political intrigue and even open rebellion. Relations with neighboring kingdoms. While Andrew focused on stabilizing Hungary from within, he also had to contend with the external challenges posed by Hungary's powerful neighbors. Hungary was located at the crossroads of Europe, surrounded by the Holy Roman Empire, Poland, and the Byzantine Empire. Each of these powers had their own interests in the region, and Andrew knew that Hungary had to carefully navigate these relationships to ensure its survival and prosperity. One of Andrew's primary concerns was maintaining peace with the Holy Roman Empire. The empire, led by Emperor Henry III, was a dominant force in Central Europe, and Andrew knew that any confrontation with the empire could have disastrous consequences. To maintain good relations, Andrew sent emissaries to the emperor, seeking to secure a diplomatic alliance. He also offered support in various imperial campaigns, positioning Hungary as a loyal ally to the Holy Roman Empire. At the same time, Andrew had to be cautious of Poland, Hungary's neighbor to the north. Poland, under King Casimir I, was a rising power in Central Europe, and Andrew could not afford to ignore its ambitions. Though the two kingdoms shared a history of cooperation, they also had their differences. Andrew's strategic alliances and careful diplomacy ensured that Hungary and Poland maintained peace, though tensions occasionally flared over territorial disputes. In the east, the Byzantine Empire, led by Emperor Constantine IX Monomachos, presented a different kind of challenge. The Byzantines, with their long history of conflict and competition with Hungary, were a constant threat. Andrew knew that Hungary could not afford to be drawn into a war with the Byzantines. But he also recognized the importance of keeping the peace. Diplomatic channels with the Byzantine Empire were established, and Andrew sought to foster mutual respect and cooperation. Despite his diplomatic efforts, Andrew's reign was marked by ongoing threats from these neighboring powers. Though he sought peace, Andrew was never naive. He knew that Hungary's position in the heart of Europe made it a target for expansionist ambitions. He fortified Hungary's borders and maintained a strong military presence, preparing for any eventuality. The church and state. One of Andrew's most significant achievements was his strengthening of the relationship between the Hungarian monarchy and the Catholic Church. The church had been instrumental in Stephen I's reign, and Andrew recognized its importance in both uniting the people and securing his rule. Early in his reign, Andrew made it clear that his monarchy would be closely aligned with the church, and he took several key steps to ensure the church's continued support. Andrew reaffirmed Hungary's commitment to Christianity, funding the construction of churches and monasteries across the kingdom. He also ensured that the church had a central role in the education of the nobility, creating schools and training centers that were firmly rooted in Catholic doctrine. These initiatives were not just religious, they were political. By aligning himself with the church, Andrew sought to establish moral authority in his rule, giving the monarchy legitimacy in the eyes of the people. At the same time, Andrew had to tread carefully. While the church was a powerful ally, it was also a potent force in its own right. Over time, tensions between the monarchy and the clergy began to surface, particularly over the church's influence in political matters. Andrew, while deeply committed to the church, also knew that he could not allow it to overshadow his authority. He worked to balance the interests of the church with his own goals, a delicate act that would define much of his reign. Challenges to power. Despite his success in securing alliances and stabilizing Hungary, Andrew's reign was not without challenges. In addition to the ever-present threat from rival nobles and external powers, Andrew faced internal rebellions. The Hungarian people, weary of war and taxation, occasionally voiced their dissatisfaction with his rule. These uprisings, though small, were a reminder that Andrew's authority was never fully secure. One of the most significant challenges came from within his own family. Andrew's sons, Solomon and Bela, were both ambitious young men, each with their own claim to the throne. As Andrew grew older, the question of succession became more pressing, and the rivalry between his sons would eventually lead to tension and conflict. Though Andrew worked tirelessly to secure Hungary's future, the fragility of his reign became apparent. The nobility, the church, and his own family all posed threats to his rule. And while Andrew was a capable king, he knew that his kingdom's future would depend on the stability of the institutions he had created and the loyalty of those who had supported him. Despite these challenges, Andrew's reign marked a period of consolidation and progress for Hungary. His leadership brought stability to a kingdom torn by civil war, and he made significant strides in strengthening both Hungary's political power and its Christian identity. But as his reign progressed, Andrew knew that he could not rest on his laurels. The road ahead would be fraught with more challenges, but Andrew was determined to face them head-on. The Kingdom of Hungary, under his leadership, was about to face the true test of its future. Mature leadership. As Andrew I entered the later years of his reign, Hungary was a kingdom transformed. The turbulent years of civil strife had given way to a period of consolidation and stability. And Andrew's vision for Hungary was taking shape. His reforms had gradually brought order to the chaotic political landscape, and his efforts to strengthen the monarchy were beginning to pay off. However, this peace was fragile, and Andrew, though an experienced and determined ruler, was not immune to the toll of time. By now, Andrew had solidified his authority over the nobility. His kingdom was more centralized than it had ever been, with royal offices and institutions ensuring that royal authority was not easily challenged. The military, once a force stretched thin by years of rebellion, had been reorganized into a disciplined and formidable unit, capable of defending Hungary's borders and maintaining internal order. But as Andrew aged, he faced new and difficult challenges, many of which were beyond his control. One of the key characteristics of Andrew's later years was the deepening of his leadership. Having navigated the most difficult political obstacles early in his reign, Andrew now focused on leaving a lasting legacy. He worked to strengthen Hungary's cultural institutions, promoting religious scholarship and the arts. The monasteries he had established became centers of learning, while Hungary itself began to develop its own identity as a center of Christian civilization in Central Europe. Still, as Andrew entered his 50s, the weariness of leadership began to take its toll. The weight of the crown, the burden of war, and the constant need for diplomacy had left their mark on the king. Though still sharp and determined, Andrew was increasingly aware of his own mortality. The question of succession loomed larger with every passing year, and Andrew knew that securing the future of the Hungarian monarchy would be his greatest test. The rise of his sons. As Andrew's health began to decline, his thoughts naturally turned to the future of his kingdom. The question of succession had always been fraught with tension in the Hungarian royal family. And now, it was no different. Andrew had two sons, Solomon and Bela, both of whom had been groomed for leadership from a young age. However, the brothers were very different in temperament, and their rivalry began to surface more strongly as Andrew's health deteriorated. Solomon, the elder of the two, was the more ambitious and assertive. He saw himself as the rightful heir to the throne, believing that his birthright was indisputable. He had been raised with the expectation of becoming king, and while he admired his father, he was eager to claim the throne for himself. His approach was often more aggressive, and his desire for power grew stronger as Andrew's health weakened. Bela, on the other hand, was the more diplomatic and cautious of the two. While he had always respected his father's leadership, he was not as eager to step into the limelight. Bela was more focused on maintaining peace and securing Hungary's stability through diplomacy rather than through military might. He believed in strengthening the kingdom's alliances and working to maintain the balance of power in Europe. The relationship between the two brothers grew strained, as each one saw his own path to the throne as the most legitimate. Their rivalry became a source of constant tension within the royal family. Andrew, aware of this, struggled to maintain a delicate balance between the two, attempting to guide them toward cooperation and unity for the sake of the kingdom. However, the growing division between Solomon and Bela created uncertainty about Hungary's future. And Andrew knew that he could not keep the peace between them forever. The cost of leadership. Though Andrew had brought Hungary back from the brink of collapse, the cost of leadership had been high. The years of warfare, political maneuvering, and constant demands on his time had left him physically and emotionally drained. He had ruled with a firm hand, but the burden of the crown was a heavy one. The toll of managing Hungary's many factions, from the nobility to the church, and maintaining a delicate balance of power in the region weighed heavily on his shoulders. As Andrew's health began to decline, he became increasingly introspective. The king who had once been so full of energy and ambition now faced the reality of his own mortality. His vision for Hungary had been realized, but he knew that his time was limited. The crown would soon pass to one of his sons, and the future of the kingdom would be in their hands. He reflected on his reign with a mixture of pride and regret. While he had done much to strengthen Hungary, he was also aware of the challenges that still lay ahead. The political landscape was fragile, and the rivalries within his own family would likely continue to threaten the kingdom's stability. The pressure of leadership also took a toll on his relationships. As Andrew became more isolated, focused on his health and preparing for his eventual death, the distance between him and his family grew. His sons, Solomon and Bela, no longer looked to him for guidance, but for the opportunity to seize the throne. The once close bond between father and sons had frayed, leaving Andrew to wonder if his work would be undone after his death. Despite his exhaustion, Andrew remained resolute. He had worked too hard to let the kingdom fall apart after his passing. He began to make preparations for a smooth succession, hoping that his sons would be able to find a way to work together for the good of Hungary. He knew that he would not live forever. but he hoped that the legacy of his reign would survive long after he was gone. Clashes with the church and nobility. Though Andrew had relied on the church for support throughout his reign, his relationship with the clergy became more complicated in his later years. As his power grew, so too did the church's influence, and the clergy began to assert themselves in ways that Andrew had not anticipated. The church, once a loyal ally, had become a political force in its own right. Some members of the clergy, particularly those in Rome, sought to increase their power over the Hungarian crown, demanding more influence in royal affairs. Andrew was no stranger to the delicate balance between church and state. But in his later years, the tension between the two institutions began to grow. The church's growing influence, combined with the ambitions of Hungary's nobility, created a volatile mix. Andrew found himself increasingly at odds with the very institutions that had helped him secure his throne. The growing power of the nobility also created further challenges for Andrew. While he had managed to control the noble factions early in his reign, by the time of his later years, the nobility had become more assertive. Many of the nobles who had once supported Andrew now demanded greater autonomy and power. The pressure to satisfy their demands strained Andrew's resources and attention. He found himself entangled in constant political negotiations, trying to appease the nobility while also ensuring that his authority remained intact. Though Andrew had accomplished much during his reign, the later years were marked by a constant struggle to maintain control over his kingdom. The tensions between the monarchy, the church, and the nobility seemed poised to boil over as Andrew's health continued to decline. Declining health and the struggle for succession. As Andrew's health deteriorated, the question of succession became increasingly urgent. He knew that his sons, Solomon and Bela, would have to find a way to work together to maintain the stability of Hungary. But as the rivalry between the two brothers deepened, Andrew feared that Hungary would once again be thrown into chaos after his death. His hopes for a peaceful succession were dashed as Solomon and Bela continued to jockey for power. In his final days, Andrew could only watch as his kingdom teetered on the brink of division. His death, whenever it came, would mark the end of an era for Hungary. Though his reign had brought stability after years of turmoil, the future of the kingdom remained uncertain. Would Hungary remain united, or would it fall into the same chaos that had plagued it before his reign? Would his sons be able to fulfill his vision, or would their rivalry tear the kingdom apart? The later years of Andrew's reign were marked by the quiet preparation for the inevitable. As his body weakened, his resolve remained strong. Hungary's future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Andrew I's legacy would be felt for generations to come. The challenges of his later years were immense, but he faced them with the same determination that had defined his entire reign. And though the crown would soon pass to his sons, Andrew knew that his place in history was secure. Hungary had been forged under his rule, and no matter the future, it would always be his creation. The death of Andrew I. As the years passed, Andrew I's health deteriorated, and the once vibrant king, who had rebuilt Hungary from the ashes of civil war, now lay fragile, his body weakened by the burdens of leadership and the relentless passage of time. In the final months of his life, the kingdom was alive with whispers of his impending death. The noble houses, the church, and the common people all turned their eyes to the king, watching with bated breath, knowing that the fate of Hungary was about to change once again. In his last days, Andrew was not alone. His closest advisors, his family, and a few loyal nobles remained by his side, offering counsel and support, but there was a quiet tension in the air. His sons, Solomon and Bela, had not reconciled their differences, and despite Andrew's best efforts to mediate, the rivalry between them had only deepened. The throne, once a symbol of unity for the Hungarian people, was now a source of division within his own family. The king's final hours were marked by a profound sense of reflection. He thought back on the struggles he had faced, the wars, the betrayals, and the compromises that had defined his reign. He had sought to bring peace to a fractured kingdom, and for a time, he had succeeded. Yet, he knew that the seeds of conflict were never far from the surface, especially within his own family. As the final breath left his body, Andrew I passed away, leaving a kingdom that was strong but vulnerable, a legacy that would be tested by time. Reflection on his leadership. In the years after his death, Andrew I's reign became the subject of both admiration and debate. His reign, though long and fraught with challenges, was ultimately one of recovery and stability. Andrew's greatest achievement was the restoration of order in Hungary after years of civil war and division. He had inherited a kingdom torn apart by rival factions and external threats. And through skillful diplomacy, military leadership, and political acumen, he had brought it back from the brink of collapse. Under Andrew's leadership, Hungary had emerged as a stronger, more centralized kingdom. He had strengthened the monarchy, diminished the power of the nobility, and fortified the kingdom against foreign invaders. His alliance with the Church had solidified Hungary's Christian identity and helped provide the moral and cultural foundation for the nation's future. The religious institutions Andrew had supported became the backbone of Hungary's education system and intellectual life. And his efforts to promote Christianity throughout the kingdom were seen as one of his lasting legacies. But Andrew's reign had not been without its flaws. While he had managed to hold the kingdom together, his later years were marred by the growing rivalry between his sons and the increasing influence of the nobility and the Church. His struggle to balance the competing interests of these groups had left him with a sense of weariness and regret. And his death left Hungary in a precarious position. Despite these challenges, Andrew's leadership was ultimately seen as a success. He had managed to bring stability to a kingdom that had been in turmoil for much of the early 11th century. His reign marked the end of one era and the beginning of another. One that would see Hungary continue to evolve and adapt to the changing political and cultural landscape of Europe. Hungary's path after Andrew's death. After Andrew's death, Hungary was thrown into a period of uncertainty. The crown passed to Solomon, his elder son, who immediately sought to assert his authority. However, Solomon's reign would be far more contentious than his father's. The rivalry between Solomon and Bela, his younger brother, continued to divide the royal family and the nobility. Though Solomon was crowned king, Bela had his own supporters and believed he too was the rightful ruler. The two brothers quickly fell into open conflict, and their rivalry sparked a series of political and military struggles that would destabilize the kingdom. Solomon, though a strong and capable ruler, lacked the unifying vision that his father had embodied. His reign was marked by internal strife, with various noble factions and foreign powers taking advantage of the division within the royal family. The Church, which had been a staunch ally of Andrew I, now found itself caught in the middle of the power struggle between Solomon and Bela, further complicating the political situation. Bela, on the other hand, took a different approach to ruling. He sought to unite the nobles and establish a more decentralized form of government, granting more power to the local aristocracy. This approach, while popular among the nobles, alienated the Church and created friction within Hungary's political structure. Bela's reign was also marked by military conflict, both within Hungary and with neighboring kingdoms. Though he eventually gained the support of some factions, his efforts to strengthen his position were met with mixed success. The period following Andrew I's death was one of instability and uncertainty. The kingdom, though still powerful, was no longer the unified force it had been under Andrew's rule. The rivalries between Solomon and Bela, along with the growing influence of the Church and the nobility, led to a series of power struggles that would continue to shape Hungary's future for years to come. The long-term impact on Hungary and Europe. Despite the turmoil that followed Andrew I's death, his legacy endured. The reforms and centralization of power that he had implemented laid the foundation for Hungary's future development. His efforts to strengthen the monarchy and the role of the Church would continue to shape the kingdom's political and cultural landscape. Even in the face of internal conflict, Hungary's position in Europe remained strong. Andrew I's influence was also felt beyond Hungary's borders. His reign marked a turning point in Central Europe, as Hungary emerged as a key player in the region's political and religious affairs. His alliances with the Holy Roman Empire and the Byzantine Empire had ensured Hungary's place on the European stage. And his contributions to the spread of Christianity in the region had solidified Hungary's role as a bastion of the faith. The political challenges faced by Solomon and Bela after their father's death would eventually lead to the emergence of a more mature and resilient Hungary. The struggles between the brothers and the shifting alliances within the kingdom would pave the way for the eventual consolidation of power under Bela I, who would go on to strengthen Hungary's position in Europe, though Andrew I's death had left Hungary in a period of uncertainty. His vision for the kingdom continued to guide its development. Andrew I's reign may have ended with his death, but his impact on Hungary was enduring. His leadership had turned a fractured kingdom into a united and prosperous state. And though his sons struggled to maintain that unity, the foundations of a powerful Hungarian monarchy had been laid. In the end, Andrew I's legacy would be remembered as that of a king who had restored order to a kingdom on the brink of collapse. A king who had fought for Hungary's future and left behind a lasting mark on the history of Central Europe.